day 7 session on selectors. Let me just mute all the participants. Okay, that's great. Welcome to day 7 of Hyperautomation for UiPath training. The present day topic which we are going to discuss today is basically on selectors. And the previous session we have discussed is on control statements as well as arguments. Right. So let's have a recap of the previous session and let's kickstart something on the concept of selectors basically. So yesterday we have discussed something on arguments. Basically, the previous session we have discussed on variables. Variables helps us in storing a single value or a multiple value of a different data types and all. So near memory location of the computer. Right? So that is a major purpose of utilizing the variables. But the scope of variable is restricted to maximum level of example, right? But since you will try to divide your logic into as less damage as possible, right? So we will try to pass the values from one XAML to another XAML. So which will not happen in terms of variables. So the concept of arguments came into picture to pass the values from one XAML to another XAML, right? So we have different types of arguments. We have termed it as like in, out, or in, or out. So in is something having the capability of receiving the values. Out is having the capability of sending the values. In or out is having the capability of sending or receiving the values from one sample to another sample. Right. So how to actually utilize the arguments? First of all, we need to invoke your particular sample. Then you need to import the arguments. So these were the steps you need to follow if you want to pass the values from one XAML to another XAML in using the concept of arguments. So we have something called control statements. So it can be like conditional or else like it can be loop. Right? So we have seen how the loops or the conditional statements works. So in terms of conditional statements, if it's sequence, we'll try to go with if or else if it is if it is a flow chart, we'll try to go with flow decision. It's similar things like if and flow decision happens, it only difference is sequence as well as flow chart. So we have seen about if else and also we have seen about while conditions. We have seen about do while. So we have also seen a difference between while and a do while, and also we have seen about utilizing for each statements and all these things, as well as a different sort of activities related to control statement things like if you want to continue, or as if you want to break the particular loop and all, if you want to parallelly execute for parallel activity and all these things, right? So all these activities will help us in achieving the particular sort of control statements, right? So that is the concept we have discussed yesterday. And today the concept which we are going to discuss is something related to selectors, right? So where we will try to execute or utilize it on a very frequent way and all. So first of all, let's try to understand why we try to use selectors, on where we will try to use the selectors, and how we will try to use the selectors. Right. So before that, we will try to understand what is UI interactions and the type of UI interactions. Right. So UI interactions are actions performed by user to interact with the system at the user interface level. See, like what happens generally, we will try to interact with any sort of an application, right? So it might be desktop-based applications or a web-based applications or an SAP mainframe, whatever the application it is, you try to perform some sort of input actions and output actions, right? So what is this input actions? So input actions are nothing but you try to click on some push button, or you try to type something on the text box. You try to pass some sort of keyboard shortcuts. So, or else like you try to paste something on the clipboard action tab, or else you try to hover your particular mouse and all, right? All these actions are nothing but inputs that is applied on a particular application. Output actions are nothing but you try to get the text of the particular element, or you try to find the elements on the particular user interface of any application, or you try to copy the data. Okay. Nothing but you're trying to extract some data in terms of an application, that is output actions. You try to provide some inputs like clicking, checking a text box, or sorry, checking a radio button or a checkbox. All these things comes under the input actions, right? So we will try to see different types of input actions here, right? So before that, I think this is the older slide. Let me just log into Google to just get the updated data. Right. Uh, we are talking about input actions in UiPath. So we have talks.uipath.com, which is nothing but the UiPath official documentation website, which will help us in getting data related to our particular input. I'm like anything, like you can have the latest release data also, like this with the previous versions data and all, right? So now we are talking about input actions. Input actions requires your robot to directly interact with an open application or a web page, right? So there are three types of input methods for click and type actions that differ in terms of compatibility and capabilities. So this is something called as compatibility, and these were the capabilities that we can foresee in terms of input methods and all, right? So we have two design experiences basically in UiPath. In the latest version, you can see the design experience we are trying to use by default is modern. But before 2020 2.10 version, we have something called as a classic design experience. So what is basically the difference between the classic or the modern design experience? Right. So we have something related to that also, where we can just understand going forward. Okay. So now just like let me try to search that particular thing also. So so classic versus modern design experience. Yeah. So when we are talking something about a modern design experience, um, so starting basically it's not from 2022 on, so it's from the 2020.10 version. So we have been introduced with the modern features in the design experience. Okay. So earlier we used to have to either enable or disable the modern experience. So for that we need to just go to the settings and we need to just enable this particular design experience. But now in the present versions you are utilizing, definitely it's been enabled by default basically. So coming to the differences, so what differences you can identify between the modern design experience and the classic design experience here. So coming to the modern design experience, we can see a differences in terms of recorders. So earlier, for the classic, you can see the desktop, basic web image, Citrix as well as computer vision recorders. But now we have only two types of recorders related to app or web or computer vision. So it's been optimized. All these things are replaced with app or web, and the computer vision recorder remains the same. So coming to activities, we can still utilize the classic design experience also. Uh, by default, if you select something related to modern design experience, but still you want to utilize some classic activities, you can enable that. How you can enable? Under the activities, you have filter icon, and the filter icon you can just enable that using show classic, which we will show it going forward. Okay. So coming to the activities and all, the major impact we can see in the design experience is mostly on the UI automation basically. Okay. So modern activities, all these activities related to classic, let's say on element appear, on an element vanish, on image appear, on image vanish, wait, find image, image exist, element exist. All these activities are replaced with a single activity called check app state. So something we have optimized in terms of modern design experience and activities when compared to the classic activities and all. Right. Earlier we have check or only check. We have now replaced with check or uncheck. So click image is replaced with single activity. So we have extract structured data, get full text, get visible text is replaced with a extract table data. Like similar to that, we have uh, close tab, go back, go forward, go home, refresh browser, everything replaced with a navigate browser. And so we have something earlier, open application, open browser, attach window, element scope, close window, start process. Everything is replaced with a use application browser, right? So all these things you will able to understand going forward. Okay. And one of the biggest advantage we have here in terms of modern design experience is basically on the object repository. So object repository is a separate concept we will try to foresee in the next session. But object repository also plays an important a key feature when we try to talk something related to modern design experience and all. Right. And related to scraping methods, like when you want to extract some table data on a web application. So earlier we have something called data scraping and screen scraping methods and all. But now it's been replaced with a single thing called as table extraction, right? So this is something where you can understand in terms of modern design experience and the classic design experience, right? So even in the interview perspective also, it's very much important to understand why we just have been upgraded to something, a modern design experience, rather than utilizing the same classic experience. Okay. Now, so all these things came into picture because we have talked something related to the design experience. Like since we try to interact with an application, how you try to design, how you want to utilize the experience, whether it's old method or something, it's a new method with an enhanced UI automation capabilities. So that's the reason why we have just talked something much in related with the input methods and all, or the design experience. So we have four capabilities basically. We can term it as like hardware events, window messages, simulate, and the Chrome API. And the compatibility, it works hardware events 100%, window message it works 80%, simulate works mostly in 99% on the web applications, but 60% on the desktop applications. Coming to the Chromium API, it works mostly on the web-based applications, not on the desktop-based applications. So if it is desktop-based applications, we try to go with these two methods primarily. If it's not working, we'll try to go with like if it is still compatible, we'll try to go with the simulate. So why we need to go with different methods? What different things we can have in terms of using these methods? Okay. First thing is nothing but the background execution capability. It cannot be seen in hardware events, but can be seen in all applications. So what is this background execution? So let's say that I want to type something on this particular text box. Okay. Or else I want to just click on this particular subscribe button and all. So though it was minimized, and if I still run my automation, it will try to come into the foreground and do the automations. So that is what we can call as a background execution. Okay. So what is the speed? So compared to speed, simulate method is the fastest of all the methods, but all the other methods, when compared to simulate method, is 50% of speed. So hotkey support and all. So in all the methods you can see, but not on the hotkey related to simulate. So what is this hotkey? So let's say that after entering something called as, let's say data scraping. Okay. So I want to have something called click on enter. So you want to utilize a shortcut or a keyboard hotkey nothing but enter or shift or caps lock or else a control button or alt method. So when you want to use a combination of the text as well as hotkeys, so that cannot be seen in the simulate method, but every other method supports. Auto-empty field. So what is this auto-empty field? So let's say that already when you launch the application, you might see some default text been already been available in this particular text box. You want to remove this particular data, enter some new data. So that is what we call as auto-empty field feature. Right. So that cannot be supported in hardware events as well as window messages. It can support in simulate as well as Chrome API. So coming to experience, design experience, if you use classic, you can't see Chromium API. If you use modern design experience, you can see all these four methods and optly utilize how you can utilize this particular methods and all. Okay. So that is what we can see. So we will try to just showcase some capabilities going forward. But this is where you will try to use input modes and all. So this is where you will try to select all things. Okay, fine. So similarly, we can talk something related to output methods. That is what we can see in the particular slides too. So containers, it's basically now it's been all replaced with a single, all these activities, open application, attach browser, open browser, attach window, get active window, all these activities are replaced by single activity, use application browser. So no container concept we have. Recorders, which we will discuss in the next session. No worries on this particular concept. So let's try to talk something about output methods and we'll jump into selectors basically. So let me just quickly have a walkthrough of output methods and jump into the concept of selectors. Right. Okay. So let me just search with output actions in UiPath. So output of screen snapping methods. Yes, we'll see. Right. So when we are trying to utilize things related to output methods like getting the text or getting some finding some element and all, uh, or like copying the data from an application and all. So all these things relies on this three basic capabilities we can have. So one thing is full text native as well as OCR. So OCR we can done as optical character recognition methods. So coming to the speed, full text is the fastest as well as OCR is the slowest method. Accuracy, we can say like full text and native, you can see 100%. But OCR, it's not in 98%. We can see only 70% of data being getting in terms of OCR and all. Background execution, yes, though it's minimized, you try to extract some data, so that can be seen in full text. Extract text position, we cannot extract the position of the text in full text, but that can be seen in native and all. So extract hidden text, you can also extract the hidden text in terms of full text. Support Citrix, no. So Citrix support can only be seen in OCR. Right. So by default, we'll try to go with the full text methods and all. So, and you can see here, when you're talking about OCR is not 100% accurate, but can be useful to extract the data. Other than the two methods could not be done on the applications, including Citrix. So if it is Citrix, basically you try to utilize the OCR things and all. So we have different capabilities in terms of OCR also. Either you can utilize Google Tesseract or Microsoft Modi, or else we have default UiPath screen OCR as well as document OCRs and all. So which will help us in extracting the data if it is an image or else an unstructured data. Right. So everything in the Citrix, though it is something an application, so for us it's an element, right? It's a table or else like it's a search button. But everything inside the Citrix will be considered as an image because it's there in the client environment, right? So this is something related to output methods, which we will understand going forward. But let's jump into concept related to selectors. So before going into selectors, we need to have an understanding what is basically UI interaction. Nothing but interacting with user interface and application in terms of web or else any application in terms of inputs or outputs. Input actions where you try to click, enter some text, so paste some data and all. So input actions is basically how you basically get the data, find the elements on the application, or keyboard actions related to copy. So this is termed as like input and output actions. When you try to do like it might be different capabilities you try to utilize. It depends whether you are trying to utilize all the four methods available in the inputs based on the capabilities or how you extract the data based on different applications we try to use. Okay, so that is one. So let's try to understand here the concept related to what's the purpose of utilizing selectors. How do you do the selector editing and all? What's the basic difference between full and partial selectors? Uh, so what is the purpose of utilizing dynamic selectors and wildcards in selectors? Right. So I can say like this is something what we can say the heart of but because you try to interact with some sort of an applications and you try to perform some sort of an active some action on a particular uh, property of an element. Let's say that you're trying to interact with a text box. There might be 10 text boxes on an application. How can your path know that this is the text box I need to enter some data now? It's something based on the properties of an UI element on the user interface and application. Selectors are nothing but are the fundamental part of UiPath Studio for identifying individual UI elements on the screen, right? So let's say I will just try to open this registration form here. Okay. So here I have multiple text boxes. So I have first name, last name, you have something like street address. It's for us because we do have something called a census, we can identify that, hey, this is city, this is something state, or this is something a country drop down and all, right? But how come your path know that? So this is where I need to enter something called as street address, or this is something where I need to enter the uh, what I can say, the last name. So the your selectors helps us in identifying the elements based on the properties of individual UI elements on the screen. So that is the basic functionality of selectors, right? So enables the user to see the automatically generated selectors and edit their attributes. So whenever you try to type something or else you try to click something or else you want to get some text and all, you try to indicate the element of that particular activity utilized. And after that, we will try to edit the selectors. So why do we need to edit the selectors? Because on the particular application, when we try to launch, so what happens? It might be dynamically providing you some data because you will try to interact with some keywords or else some data on the particular instance based on the server response. So when you try to update the or go to the next screen or else like you are trying to go with a new keyword search and all. So what happens again? It hits the server and then the server will respond you back with the different data and all. What happens? The application interface remains the same, but the properties of the particular elements and all gets updated in the background, which we don't know. But when we try to get the data in terms of selectors, so the data will be getting updated. So in that case, to make it dynamic in the sense like the same selector should be working for every instance of getting the data on the application. We try to do some modifications on the selector So that is how we call it as selector editor and all. Right. So we can edit the selectors and all. So we will try to show these things practically once we are done with the theoretical part. So here we can validate whether it's the selector is a valid selector or not, or we can again indicate the element, or we can just try to repair, and we will try to just confirm whether the element after doing selector edits and all, it's still a valid one or not by validating. If it is red, it's something, it's not working fine. If it is amber, it's ready to uh, check, and green is something where you can say like it's working fine and all, right? So let's try to understand what are the different types of selectors we have. We have full selector and partial selectors. So full selectors are utilized when you want to work on a same application. Let's say that I want to work on the same window. Multiple actions are performed on the same window. So then we'll try to go to full. Sorry. Sorry, I have misspelled it. So when you want to work with something on the same application and multiple actions can be performed on the same application, we'll go with the partial selectors. So full selectors when you want to work with on different windows. Let's say that now I was working on a web-based application. After one action, I'll try to navigate to another screen related to desktop application. So then I'll go with the full selectors. So if you go with the full selectors, all the top level node information with your element node details can be seen here. But when you're talking about the partial selectors, you can see the first line related to the application level window selector is not editable because it's something on the container what will try to utilize it for. You will go with the directly the property of the element you're trying to interact rather than the high level application level windows, right? It's much faster when you're trying to utilize partial selectors. But the thing is that where you utilize, if it's on same screen, multiple actions, if it's on different screens, only minor actions, then you'll go with full selectors, right? So that's the basic difference between uh, selectors and all, right? So let's try to see what all these things we are talking make sense or not. Okay. So let me open UiPath. See if there are any queries. Can I explain in practical way for full of? Yes, we'll do that. What about the attended automation template and it's different with default class? See, like attended automations or like unattended. So we have two types of automations, attended or unattended. So attended is something where it runs in parallel with the humans and all. Like let's say that there is a bot which needs to be triggered manually by a human and it requires some input by the human and all. It's called attended automation. So attended automation is something where it runs in the background, not on our particular physical machines and all. It works on the virtual machines and all, right? So if you want to schedule the bot on morning like 10 o'clock, it runs automatically on a particular available virtual machine. We have scheduled and all these things, right? So let me open here, but here. Right. So let me just show it on use application of browser first of all. So we said, right, let's say that I'm trying to use design experience, but I can still use classic activities, yes, by enabling these things, right? So this is where you can enable or disable the classic activities, where you can see the modern design experience under design. You can see this, but by default, I think it's been now moved. The feature which we have seen earlier, it's not there. LAV is to have this particular option where you can enable design experience to modern, but it's been already been enabled because it's latest version 2024.2.1. Okay, fine. Now we're in design experience of modern. Okay, so let's try to interact with an application. Let's try to use application of browser. Okay, all right. So I have different applications on the screen here, right? So I have something yahoo.com, or else there is a base related to uh, this particular or productions and all, and there is a registration form too. How come UiPath know that this is the screen I need to work with, right? So for that, we need to indicate application first of all. Like getting a property of an application is basically using an application of browser, right? So once we get here, we have seen here, I have got the URL, as well as if I just click on the properties of the particular activity, you have something called a target, right? Under the target, unified application target, you have something called selector. So if you just click here, this is where you can identify something, whether your application is valid or all these things. So this is a basic selector of your application, what you're trying to interact with, right? So fine. So now I want to basically type something on this particular application. So what I'll do, I'll use an activity called type into, right? So on this application, so now on this application, I want to type something on this first name, or else on the last name, or else on address, or else an address line too. How come I know that I need to type on this particular first name itself, right? So for that, we have for every activity related to UI interactions, you need to mandatorily indicate the element. So now instead of all the applications here, it's trying to show me only the registration form, right? So here I will say that this is the place where I need to interact or type something. So I'll try to type here. So we have here something called strict selector, fuzzy selector, computer vision, and image. Right. So when you are trying to select an element or identify the properties of a new element on the user interface, so we have options. Either it can be strict selector. So fuzzy is something a method returns a single element that strictly matches all the selector attributes. Or else, like if you want to go with the fuzzy selector, this method returns multiple elements with attributes that are similar to the ones found in the fuzzy selector. The degree of similarity can be adjusted when the accuracy is slider. This method usually requires an anchor. Right? So basically, we'll try to go with the strict selector as a primary method because this is something where you will try to identify an element, okay, which is basically or what I can say, much accurate. Okay. So once you select the target, it's best practice to even select something an anchor, stating that every time you see a target there, nothing but every time you try to enter your first name. So below that, you have something called first. So which is something, an element you can identify. Okay. So this is something a target we are trying to utilize. And this is if it is first, it will try to go the first selector. If you enable these icons, nothing but options of fuzzy selector or computer vision or else an image. So firstly, it will try to go with utilizing searching an element using a strict selector. If it's not identified, then it will try to go the fuzzy selector. Then also it's not identified, it will try to search for something called as an element based on image or computer vision capabilities. But these things will try to and like hamper our particular things to identify. So basically, we'll try to go with only utilization of either strict selector or fuzzy selector. So we'll try to mostly go the strict selector. If it's not identifying, it's dynamic in nature, then we'll try to go with the fuzzy selector. Okay, fine. So once we get the element here, it's not that only two properties are there on this particular two attributes are there on this particular selector. To see more things, we have something called the UI Explorer here. So let me try to open the UI Explorer. Right. So if you can see here, there are much more properties or attributes for the particular element here. So I can just enable the name. I can just enable the type of the particular thing. It's a text box and all, right? So you can make sure that you are adding some sort of properties or attributes to the UI element and all. So that can happen in the UI Explorer. So in the UI Explorer, you have something called visual tree, where you can see all the elements. In all of these elements, your element is basically there on this particular tree, right? So and also you can try to see the selector by editing, and you can also highlight. So once you highlight, this is where it will try to highlight, stating that either on the available elements, this is the element you are trying to interact with, right? So we have different options of selecting the frameworks also. So by default, we'll try to go the default method, but sometimes if the default method is also not getting accessible, you will try to go with Act 2 accessibility framework or else the automation framework, right? And also you can try to enhance that particular things by either selecting whatever the attributes what we have here. And we have different properties also for the particular attribute. So we have a name, we have a state. So a name is like first, what is the application? It's chrome.exe. So what is the path? App path, it's chrome.in. All these things, like all these properties. Sometimes it will help us, but sometimes it won't be helpful for us. It purely depends, basically, right? So by experience, you will be able to understand why I need to enhance all the selectors. Okay, right. So we have got some data, and I'll just simply click on confirm. Right. So what is the data you want to enter? So let's say that I want to enter something called hyperautomation. Okay. So if I just go to this particular activity under properties, under target, you will have your selector basically. Okay. So basically you're trying to see the strict selector, and this is the selector where you can see the data. If you still want to do some edits, okay, you can do it here, or you can open the UI Explorer where you can get more properties or attributes of the particular element, and you can just add or remove or dynamically change it based on your requirements. And you can still highlight and validate whether the element is what you are trying to interact with, right? So that is what and how you can interact with an application using selector as a method. Okay. So let me just try to run a file where we will try to see an interaction with an application where it will try to enter the hyperautomation or not. Right? It was able to enter the data. So it was able to enter the data. Right? So that is how and where you try to utilize something concept of selectors. It can be any UI element, any action you try to go with utilizing those things. Let's say that I want to select something on the drop down, right? So we have something called select item. Okay, so which will help us in identifying the elements on the drop down. So here I'll try to select something on the drop down. So here I'll use a strict selector and disable all these things. So country will my anchor, and I'll just hit on confirm. So what is the data you want to enter basically? So I want to select something called India. Okay. So let me here utilize something called empty before typing, right? So already we have the data on this particular application on the first name, but the bot should be actually trying to empty the data, enter again hyperautomation, then select something on the drop down called API, right? So that is our intention basically. So or else like I'll try to enter something called UiPath. Okay, so there is the data. So here we are trying to provide hard-coded data, but in real time we'll try to pass the variables or else we'll try to loop it and get all your data. Right. So it has executed in the background too. Right. So it has removed the existing data, hyperautomation, it has entered UiPath, and it has selected a drop-down value called it. So that is someone where you interact with an application in terms of elements by choosing the properties of a particular element rather than something on the text or imaged positions and all. So earlier we used to do something like, let's say that I want to enter on the last name. So you will get the text position here or the last text box position here. You have something on the submit button and at the bottom, right? We used to do some automations before 5 years or 10 years back. It's based on the position, but now it's based on the properties of an application. Okay. Any other doubts? Can you please explain in practical way? Zoom in, please. Yes, we'll zoom in. Fine. This is something related to utilization of selectors, but why I need to use or fine tune my selectors and all. Okay. So let's take an example here. I'll indicate the element again here. I'm just using the same interface. Okay. So now I want to get the text. So what I'll do, I'll use an activity called get text to get the data. Okay. So what I'll do, I'll use a get text here. So what I'll do, I'll indicate on a particular element. Okay. So I'll indicate on the element to get some data, right? So what I'll do, I want to basically get the data which was there on this particular application. Okay. Let's say that I want to get all this data like accountant, chief executive officer, junior technical engineer, software engineer, and all this particular data based on the position. So generally, let's say that you have 10 entries on the application. It might be 5 entries or 4 entries or even sometimes 3 entries. We don't know that particular scenario. So as a layman person, what I'll think is I need to utilize 10 get text activities to get all this 10 text box data. Of course, no, we will use only a single text box, but we will try to understand the difference between each element. Try to change your selector to get all the data using a single text box. Sorry, single get text activity. So how can I do that? So before doing that, I need to understand what is the difference between the first first element property and the second element property. Though we have something called software engineer here and also software engineer here and also here. So you will have a difference between these two properties of an elements. So I need to identify that particular change. In order to do that, what I'll do, I'll just first of all click on the first element. I'll get the properties of the particular element here, right? So I'll use strict selector, not the fuzzy. Okay. So then what I'll do, I will try to click on more properties. To get more properties, I need to click on this UI Explorer. Okay, so it will open more details. So what it will say is, I will have something called column name. You have column name called position. Okay. And we have something called AN. Right. So these are the details. So what I'll do, I'll open that in Notepad. So we are trying to understand how you can make your selector dynamic basically. Okay. So this is the data I'm trying to copy paste to see the difference. We'll showcase that particular difference, what it is basically. Right. So then I'll again come to the application here. I'll indicate the second element here on the application. So earlier I have indicated on accountant, right? So now I'll try to indicate on CEO. So what happens? Again, there will be a change in your data. I'll try to copy paste this particular data and note it down in the notepad. Right. So now I will try to understand what is the difference between this first particular element and the second element. So we'll try to follow these things element by element. So where I've seen that the application is Chrome. So here it's also same. The title is data tables, JavaScript table library. Yes, it's also the same here. So we have web control ID. Yes, example. It's also example the same. We have tag here as table. We have also tag here as table, right? We have table column here as 2. We have table column here as 2. But we have table row here as 2, but it's been updated to 3, right? And also we have seen that the A name is accountant here, but here it is chief executive officer, and the column position is the same. So we know that there is two changes we need to keep in mind to make it dynamic. So one thing, I need to increment this particular table row, and we need to make sure that it might be accountant, it might be software engineer, it might be a clerk, it might be anything. You need to replace that, right? So how can I do this two things? So in order to achieve these two things, we have something called two concepts. So one concept is something called a wildcards, and the second concept is utilizing variables inside your particular selectors. How can I use a variable inside a selector? That is one thing. And second thing, how to make your make use of wildcards. We have two wildcards. So something we can call it as question mark as well as asterisk. What this question mark and asterisk will do? Let's say that we have something called psi 1. Okay. I know that for the first selector, you will get a value called psi 1. And for the second selector, you will get psi 2. And for the third selector, you will get psi 3. See, I want to make it dynamic. So to make it dynamic, what I want to do, I want to replace this particular single character. So if it is a single character you want to replace, so the question mark will say that it might be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Single character can be replaced, or it can be anything between A to Z, or it can be question mark. It can be anything in that particular place. A single character will be replaced. So sometimes you will also will get something called Sai Kiran, or else like you can get something called Sai Kumar, or else you will get something called Sai Kishore. Okay. To replace these particular values, n number of values, and to consider that as a single entity, we will try to replace that with a asterisk. Asterisk will say that it can be Kumar, it can be Kishore, it can be Ravi, it can be any value, it can be of any characters. So if we try to utilize Sai star here, so the bot will understand that it is something, a value you need to identify starting with Sai. It can be any value, right? So in a similar way, here it can be accountant, it can be anything, right? So what I'll do is I'll try to replace that with a single character called asterisk. It's called as a wildcard. Okay, fine. So now I need to replace a variable here, right? So how do I replace? I'll go to UiPath. First of all, I'll save this particular data. I'll just do the changes. How to do the changes? We'll see it in UiPath itself. Okay, I'll just confirm here. And I'll just save the data saying that it's str text. Okay, so how do I read the properties of a particular selector? So what I'll do, before that I'll just create a variable saying that int count. because like I need to increment the particular value, right? It can be int count, and the basic value starts, it's an integer, and the value starts from 2, because the element is starting from 2. I am trying to pass the initial values to, right? Fine. So what I need to do, I need to click on this particular properties, and then I need to edit the selector. Right. So what I need to do here, I'll try to edit the selectors. So I'm trying to replace all these values with a single asterisk. So if I replace that with an asterisk, it will say that a name is like Kiran, it can be clerk, it can be teacher, it can be headmaster, it can be principal, it can be anything. Okay. So now I need to increment this thing. So I need to pass a variable. So how can I pass? You need to remove the existing value. Okay. So you need to just use a right click here. We have an option called use variable. So what is the variable name you want to use? It's int count, and hit on confirm. So now here earlier value, which is 2, is replaced with int count. Right. So I'll just hit on save. Okay. So what I'll do is, so let's try to pass some value here and see whether we are getting accurate result or not. So we have variables as values 2. So I'll use a message box to print the value basically. And I'm trying to see what is the data I'm trying to get. Okay. So initially it was 2. So let's try to run the file, see whether we are getting accounted as an output or not. So we are getting appointment. Okay. So now if I pass something called 3, you should get chief executive officer. 4, junior technical author. 5, software engineer. 6, software engineer. 7, integration specialist. Right. So what I'll do in the variables, I'll pass a value called 7. Right. So if I pass a value called 7, I should get something, a value called a junior technical author, or else an integration specialist. Sorry. So there is a 7th value. So I'm getting an integration specialist value. So now it is something, it's working based on your editing of the particular selector, right? You made your selector dynamic so that a single text box can help you to get all the data, right? So same thing without passing values, what I'll do, I'll use a while loop. Okay. And here in this particular while loop, I'll pass all these values. Okay. So I'll say the condition should be flowing till the int count is less than 11. Okay. And I'll try to increment the particular value here. So I'll use the assign. Okay, I'll use an assign here, and I'll increment value called int count is basically int count plus 1. Okay, so in the variables, I'll pass initial value as 2, and I'll try to run till my condition is basically less than 11. Nothing but till 10 it will try to loop. So first it will try to enter a value called 2. So where you will get accountant, then it will try to increment. It will try to enter 3, where you got chief executive officer, then the technical author, then the software engineer, integration specialist, software engineer, pre-sales support, sales assistant, right? So till this condition you have written and you have stopped it. So for that I've just utilized a while loop saying that my condition should be true till 12, nothing but 11, and you're trying to loop it, right? This here I've used only single get text, but I'm getting the values of all the elements, right? You can still change the properties of the elements here. So the same selector, okay, the same selector I'll try to utilize. Instead of getting the position, I'll try to get something now. Sorry. So I will try to get something now. The names here basically. I want to get the names. See how I'll try to get. Let's see. I'll try to see the difference basically. So we can have a difference in terms of the column name as name only, and also the column position also. Right, the table column is one. Right. So let's see what I need to change here to make sure I'm getting not the positions but the names. So I see that the table column here is 2, but it is 1. Okay, that I need to change. And the column name here is position, but I need to change to name. Right. So that are the two changes I need to do. I'll just close this. I'll go to the properties. I'll use a strict selector to just modify. I know that the position is name now, and the table column is 1. Right. So let's change it. We have changed the property only, right? In the selector, not the get text activity to get all the things. Now let's try to run. Instead of getting uh, the data in the position, we'll get all these details one by one. So we have got Iris Tatua, Angelo, Ramcos, Aston Cox, Bradley, Brandon, Braley, Bruno, Caesar, Kara, and Kendrick. Right, and it will automatically stop, right? Because we have set a condition to loop only till 11 times. And in each loop, it will try to increment your particular value. Earlier it was 2, then it was 3. It will enter the value here, it will get the data and print it. Right. So this is how you can make your selector dynamic by passing variables as well as passing something related to your wildcards. So when we are talking something about selectors here, if I just open here, you can see the top level window is not editable here for us because you have something called the parent node in your major selector, but in the container based selector. So this is basically your partial selector, and where is your main top level data is there? It's on the use application of browser. In the use application browser, if you go with the selector, so this is where your top level application window data is only there, not the elements details. Where you have the element details under this particular use application browser, you have something called this particular data where you can differentiate it's a full selector or a partial. Okay, so this is how you can utilize selectors, and I can say it's basically the heart of your pattern. So let's see any queries. I think I have shown you where you can see the practical way of using full selector and practical selector, partial selectors. So what if there is a frame in between? Then how to switch frame? Like you can use navigate browser and all those things. Or else like let's say that after utilizing this particular data, I want to click something on this particular thing after extracting some data. Let's say, right. So what you can do is see on the same things I'll try to utilize. It purely depends how you're designing your particular pattern. So let's say that after extracting the data, I'll use application browser to interact with some application related to registration form, let's say. Okay. So now I want to type something. I'll use a type into indicate on the screen. I want to enter some data here. So I'll just come down, say some data. It's uh, a sample data, let's say. I'm just trying to show some data here. Okay. So here in the message box, I want to automatically close, not by clicking here. So I'll try to make it a bit faster by going to properties. I'll say like automatically close after 2 seconds. Okay. So let me run the file. Let's see what happens. automatically it will try to click OK itself. After extracting all the data, let's say that this is the data that helps us in entering the data in the registration. Let's say. Link. So I think it happens in the background itself. So let's see whether you have the data. Let's see. The sample data is automatically read. It happens in the background execution. So no, it's not required that it should be enabled or not, but it has navigated from this particular screen to this screen. Right. Okay. Any other doubts? Please do let us know, or else like we'll just wind up the session as of now. I'll take that as no. Please do practice on the things what we have showcased in our particular session. Please do go with the recordings as well as materials. So we'll be sharing that in next 1 2 hours. Right. Thank you. Have a great day. Thanks for joining. I wish everyone happy Eid Mubarak, happy Ramzan. Thank you.
Thank you, bro.